When a child loses the protective shade of their parents, they become scattered and lost in the world. That's exactly what happened to me. I was only 8 years old when both my parents passed away. Following a family discussion, I was handed over to my uncle's care. I was genuinely happy with this decision. My uncle had always shown kindness to me, gently patting my head with affection. But what I didn't realize back then was that all of it was just a show, meant only to appear kind in front of my parents. I had no idea that this very decision would eventually ruin my entire life. When I was told I'd be living with my uncle, I was overwhelmed with joy. He was the wealthiest in the family. He owned everything: money, cars, a mansion. That was one of the reasons they decided to leave me in his care. God had blessed him with 2 sons, and at that time I had no idea that the house I was entering wasn't going to raise me with love and care, but with cruelty and savagery. I didn't know that soon a price would be placed on my soul. My downfall began inside that very mansion. When my parents died, I was too young to understand the depth of the loss. It hurt, but I forgot it quickly. Now I was living with my uncle. His wife never liked me. Even in their massive house, there wasn't a single corner that truly felt like mine. My uncle, on the other hand, showed a great deal of affection. But very soon I began to understand why his kindness toward me felt different. He had a separate room prepared just for me and moved me there. I was deeply grateful to him. Despite my young age, I had matured far beyond my years. But my aunt's behavior constantly reminded me that I meant nothing in their lives. They didn't take me in out of love, but only out of pressure from the family. Both of their sons had strange, unsettling personalities. Their expressions were always filled with rage. They never smiled or spoke kindly to anyone. Even if a servant asked them a simple question, they'd respond with harshness, driving them away. I disliked them both intensely. Even though they never liked seeing me, I always forced a polite smile whenever I crossed paths with them. They wouldn't even look in my direction. They were about 20 years old, identical twins. Same face, same behavior. I tried to avoid them as much as possible, mostly because my aunt had made it very clear. When my sons come home, you should disappear into your room. There's no reason for you to show your face in front of them. Her words were harsh and humiliating. Back when my parents were alive, I had been showered with love and affection. But ever since I came to this house, all that warmth had vanished. My heart would silently weep. At first, I endured everything, because deep down I knew I had nowhere else to go. This was my only shelter now. When a child grows up without the shadow of their parents, they are forced to accept cruelty and pain far too early. They mature long before their time. If the child is a son, society somehow helps him survive. But when it's a daughter, she is buried alive in silence. Then, one night, while I was asleep in my room, I suddenly felt as though someone was sitting beside me, staring at me. I opened my eyes instinctively, disturbed by the burning sensation of someone's gaze. It was my uncle. He was sitting right in front of me. Seeing him in my room in the middle of the night made my breath freeze. The room was dark, and his silent presence terrified me. At that age, I didn't fully understand danger. I wasn't scared of why he was there. I was just frightened by the suddenness of it all. But before I could scream, he pressed his hand firmly over my mouth. My eyes widened in horror as he slowly moved closer to me. I didn't understand what was happening. Suddenly, he leaned over me. I couldn't breathe. I kept trying to push him away, but he didn't stop. He had thrown away every sense of decency, every relationship. In the darkness of that night, he took advantage of me. He destroyed me. That side of him I had never seen before, and it shattered me completely. At such a young age, I was exposed to the monsters hiding in human skin. I was just 8 years old. He didn't even consider the fact that I had only recently lost my parents, that I was still mourning. And yet he did what no one ever should. He satisfied his hunger and simply walked out of the room. That night, for me, was nothing less than torture. My body was in agony. And eventually I passed out from the pain. It wasn't until the next afternoon, when my aunt roughly shook me awake, that I opened my eyes again. Every part of my body ached with unbearable pain, but who could I share this pain with? There was no one. My aunt had woken me with harsh taunts and walked out coldly, leaving me to deal with everything on my own. I forced myself to sit up in bed, but standing, walking, it all felt nearly impossible. Still, I dragged myself toward the bathroom, freshened up somehow, and came out slowly. There was fear in my eyes. I didn't want to face anyone. I was too young to fully understand what had happened to me the night before. But deep inside, I knew something was horribly wrong. As I stepped out of my room, both of my uncle's sons gave me a strange look, grimacing with disgust. Before they could say or do anything, I hurried back into my room and shut the door. My heart was overwhelmed with confusion, fear, and shame. I felt like I was shrinking into myself, terrified of the world around me. After some time, a maid came in and silently placed food for me. I was starving, both from hunger and thirst. I immediately sat down and ate as much as I could. Then I lay down again, too weak, too exhausted to even sit up properly. Even moving my legs off the bed required more strength than I had. I had just closed my eyes to rest when suddenly the power went out. The house was always dark, and now the room was drowned in shadows. I was already on edge when I heard the door creak open. Someone had entered the room. My body stiffened in fear. I could feel it. It wasn't just anyone. Someone was here, and I was terrified it would happen again. But this time, it wasn't my uncle. It was his two sons. I curled up on the bed, my body shaking with fear. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I pleaded, voice trembling. Please, please don't hurt me. I'm already in so much pain. I'm begging you. Have mercy. Don't do anything to me. But before I could say another word, they silenced me. Both of them. They placed their hands over my mouth just like he did. And then they threw me down on the bed. I was just a child. They were two fully grown young men. There was nothing I could do to stop them. Within minutes, my mind gave up. My body collapsed under the weight of pain and fear. I lost consciousness. The pain of that night was unlike anything I had ever experienced. But what happened again the next morning caused me even deeper suffering. Those two monsters tormented my body for who knows how long. I had no idea. When I woke up in the dead of night, the room was once again swallowed by darkness. I felt as if my life was slipping away. I tried to get out of bed immediately, but it felt like chains were wrapped tightly around my feet. My hands were bound as well, and there was tape covering my mouth. My sobbing had been stifled. I wanted to scream out loud and tell someone what those beasts had done to me. But my uncle showed no mercy, even to his own niece. I called silently to my parents in my heart, pleading with them to take me back to their side. It became clear to me then that as long as a child, especially an unmarried daughter, has the protective shadow of her parents over her, no one dares to look at her with filthy eyes. But ever since my parents passed away and I came to live with my uncle, my life had become worse than I could ever have imagined. As I was lost in these painful thoughts, suddenly the door of my room opened and two strange men entered. Though I was very young, only 8 years old, I appeared older than my age. Those two men stared at me from head to toe with intense, lecherous gazes. Since last night, I had already learned what dirty looks meant. I felt as if I didn't even have a life, as if I were a doll they wanted to play with, and they were doing exactly that. They kept looking at me for a long time until one of the men came closer and ran his hand over my entire body. Then, speaking in Arabic, he said something to the other man. The second man nodded in agreement, and both left the room. Their actions and the way they carried themselves left my whole body trembling with disgust. Though I was so small, I understood clearly what they had been discussing about me. That one night and day had aged me more than even the death of my parents had. A short while later, my uncle entered the room and began to untie my hands and feet. I looked at him with frightened eyes, feeling as if he would once again use my body for his own pleasure and cause me unspeakable pain. But by the grace of God, they did not harm me. Instead, they untied my chains and gestured for me to go to the bathroom. Their tone was commanding without any remorse. They said, "Change your clothes immediately and come outside. Some people have come to see you." The softness I once heard in their voices was now replaced by strict authority. I quietly went to the bathroom because if they came near me again, I felt I would collapse from the pain. I quickly locked myself inside, changed my clothes, and came back to the room. Now, stepping outside felt like the hardest thing in the world. A deep fear gripped my heart, warning me that something terrible was about to happen. The innocent laugh I once had was now replaced with dread. I decided not to leave the room and stay inside instead. As I moved closer to my bed, suddenly the door burst open and my aunt entered angrily, shouting, "Your uncle told you to come out immediately. Don't you understand? Should I explain it to you properly?" I knew the meaning behind her words. If I delayed any longer, she would start beating me, as she had done many times before. Fearful, I followed her outside immediately. Outside, those same two men were sitting, eyeing me closely. My uncle was speaking to them in English. I wasn't educated enough to understand, so I silently stood beside them. The men smiled as they looked at me and continued talking to my uncle. After some time, one of the men handed my uncle a check, then stood up and started walking toward me. My heart fluttered like a frightened bird. I knew something was terribly wrong. My uncle's two sons sat nearby, staring at me with lustful eyes. Suddenly, one of the men grabbed my hand and tried to take me away. I clung tightly to my aunt's hand. The pain of the night was something else, and experiencing everything again in the morning caused me immense suffering once more. Those two beasts tormented my body for who knows how long. I had no idea. When I opened my eyes in the dark of the room, I felt as if my life was slipping away. I immediately tried to get out of bed, but felt as if my feet were chained. My hands were also tied, and my mouth was taped shut. My sobs were stifled. I wanted to scream and tell people what those monsters had done to me. My own uncle showed no respect, even for his real niece. In my heart, I was silently calling out to my parents, pleading for them to take me away. I had understood by now that as long as a child lives under the protection of their parents, especially a virgin daughter, no one dares to look at her with impure eyes. But since my parents had passed away and I had come to live with my uncle, my life had become worse than ever. While I was lost in these thoughts, suddenly, the door to my room opened, and two strange men entered. I was very small, only 8 years old, but I looked older than my age. Both men looked at me from head to toe with deep, dark eyes. From last night, I had already learned what dirty looks meant. I felt as if I had no life of my own, like a doll for them to play with as they pleased. They stared at me for a long time. Suddenly, one man came close, ran his hand over my body, and spoke something in Arabic to the other man. Upon hearing him, the other man nodded in agreement, and both left the room. Their actions and manner left my body trembling. I was disgusted with my own existence. Even though I was very small, I understood what they were discussing about me. One night and one day had matured me more than the death of my parents had. A little while later, my uncle entered the room and began untying my hands and feet. I looked at him with fearful eyes, feeling as if they would torment me again. I couldn't even count how many times this happened. One day, I decided that I must escape from that apartment because if I stayed there, those people would continue to target me for their lust. I had been living there for almost 2 years, and in those 2 years, I had learned things that a 10-year-old child should never have to know. Without letting anyone know, quietly and without the woman's knowledge, I slipped out of the apartment. I was walking fast on the streets of Dubai, my eyes scanning the surroundings carefully. My blood was racing through my veins. My hands and feet were still numb from everything I had endured. I knew very well what fate awaited me if I got caught. I had gone so far that the apartment was no longer visible anywhere nearby. I took a deep breath and looked left and right. I didn't even realize where I was standing. What I did not know was that the torment I had escaped from would catch me again, or worse than that. I wandered around, walking slowly. It was night. The sky was covered in dark blackness. The moonlight felt comforting. I had slowed down my pace considerably. I came to a completely deserted place. I had no knowledge of this country or its streets. I just kept walking on whatever path was visible. Suddenly, I collided with a man. He was dressed like the other men, in traditional Arab clothes typical of that region. He suddenly grabbed my arm and looked me over from head to toe. I became terrified. My heart began pounding with fear and dread. I understood immediately that I had fallen into the wrong hands once again. This man was no ordinary person. Suddenly, he started dragging me along the road. I knew a little Arabic, so I tried to stop him using what little I knew, but he didn't listen at all. He took me a short distance and shoved me into a black car. Then he started driving fast. I tried to break the glass and attract attention from passers-by, hoping to protect myself. But what happened was far worse than I had imagined. I became the target of his cruelty. Suddenly, he grabbed me by my hair and slammed me against the dashboard of the car. I was in such a position that even the slightest sound from me would have caused unbearable pain. So I remained completely silent, my heart pounding with fear and helplessness. He had taken me to a place I had never seen before, a dark, sinister venue filled with women, many more than I could count, all dressed scantily in revealing clothes. The air was thick with smoke, and the thumping bass of loud, senseless music filled the room. These women moved as if entranced, swaying rhythmically to the beat without a care in the world. It was a world so alien and terrifying to me that my heart felt like a dry leaf fluttering helplessly in a violent storm. Around me were men, and many men, who watched these women with wild eyes filled with lust and desire. They jumped up eagerly, approaching the women to engage in acts that my innocent mind could barely comprehend. The sight was so horrifying that I wished I could vanish from that place entirely. Without warning, the man who had brought me here threw me onto the lap of an elderly man. The cruel tone in his voice was unmistakable as he said something in Arabic, words I didn't fully understand at the time, but the meaning was clear. "The payment I owed you has been fulfilled. I release her into your care." The elderly man wrapped his arms tightly around my waist, gripping me firmly as if claiming ownership. He even nodded his head approvingly, giving a thumbs-up sign, signaling that the transaction was complete. That moment marked the beginning of my downfall. From then on, my life turned into a long, dark prison sentence that lasted nearly 4 years. Those years were filled with unimaginable torment and degradation, the kind of suffering only I truly understood. I was trapped in a nightmare where my body was no longer my own, and my spirit was crushed under the weight of endless humiliation. Every day was a struggle to survive, to keep some shred of dignity alive in a place designed to strip it away. I was surrounded by countless women, each bearing their own scars and stories of suffering. Yet, despite the misery around me, the isolation I felt was profound. My cries for help went unheard, my pain invisible to the outside world. The woman who had initially cared for me before I was dragged into this hellish place, the one who had shown me kindness, was no longer with me. I was left alone, abandoned, with no hope of rescue or escape. My body bore the marks of relentless abuse, and my heart carried wounds deeper than anyone could see. Even though I was so young, my mind quickly understood the harsh reality I was living. The men who had taken me here cared nothing for my age or innocence. They saw me as an object, a possession to be used and discarded. My spirit shriveled under the weight of their cruelty. But despite all this, a small part of me still clung to hope, hope that one day this nightmare would end, and I could reclaim my life and dignity. I dreamed of freedom, of a life where I could be safe and loved again. Yet those dreams felt so distant, almost impossible to reach. Each day I lived through was another day swallowed by darkness, and I questioned whether the light would ever return to my life. Those 4 years broke me in ways words cannot describe, but they also forged in me a resilience I never knew I had. I survived because I had no other choice, because deep inside, a part of me refused to give up. Only I truly know the pain and suffering I endured during those years. No one else could ever understand the depth of the wounds left on my soul or the battle I fought every single day to simply exist. I prayed to Allah every day, begging Him with all my heart to somehow help me escape from that dreadful place. I pleaded in my prayers, asking Allah to guide me to a safe place away from the torment I was enduring. Every moment until my last breath, I was on my knees before God, crying out in desperation. My soul was broken, yet my faith remained alive because I believed that only Allah could rescue me from the darkness surrounding me. By the grace of Allah, my prayers were answered sooner than I expected. One day, without warning, the police raided the place where I was imprisoned. The same place where I had suffered in silence, trapped for what felt like an eternity, was suddenly broken open by the sound of officers shouting and doors being forced open. The nightmare I was living in finally came to an end when they found me there, weak and broken, but still alive. They took me away from that place, and I was brought to a safe shelter, a sanctuary where many children who had also faced terrible hardships were being cared for. For the first time in what seemed like forever, I felt a flicker of hope. The shelter was a place filled with people who truly wanted to help us, who treated us like human beings and not objects to be abused. I was given the chance to heal physically and emotionally, surrounded by others who had also survived their own battles. Even now, years later, I continue to pray during my salah prayers, tears streaming down my face as I ask Allah to forgive me for the sins that were forced upon me, sins I never chose to commit. My heart carries the weight of those violations, but I pray for mercy and understanding because I know that these acts were not my doing. I beseech Allah to forgive me for what I was made to endure and for what I was forced into against my will. Every day, I also pray that Allah makes my uncle an example of justice, a warning to others who think they can abuse their power and destroy innocent lives. He was the one who brought me to this hell on earth, the man who betrayed his own family's trust and innocence. The pain he caused me runs deep, but I place my trust in Allah's divine justice to hold him accountable. Not long after my rescue, I saw news on television that caught my attention immediately. The headline was about a massive explosion at a large company, an explosion that had destroyed the building and taken the life of its owner. The man's death was described as brutal and terrifying. The details were too horrific to be shown on camera, and his face was deliberately kept hidden from the public eye. As I watched the news, I suddenly recognized some faces nearby, my uncle's sons and their wives. My heart stopped, and in that moment, I fell to my knees in sujood prostration, overwhelmed by a mixture of sorrow and relief. I praised Allah silently, whispering, "You are the greatest, the most merciful, the all-powerful." The Almighty's justice had finally reached those who had caused me so much pain. I could not help but feel that Allah's judgment was swift and certain, and I found some peace knowing that the oppressors had met their fate. This chapter of my life is not easy to speak about, but sharing it is a part of my healing. It is a testament to Allah's mercy and power to save even those who seem lost in darkness. My story is linked with the countless others who have faced cruelty and injustice, yet who survive through faith and the hope of deliverance. Though my past remains a scar on my soul, I continue to move forward, praying for strength, forgiveness, and the chance to live a life filled with dignity and peace. I remain grateful that Allah answered my desperate prayers, and I hope my story encourages others trapped in similar situations to hold on to faith and never lose hope. I prayed to Allah every day, begging Him with all my heart to somehow help me escape from that dreadful place. I pleaded in my prayers, asking Allah to guide me to a safe place, away from the torment I was enduring. Every moment until my last breath, I was on my knees before God, crying out in desperation. My soul was broken, yet my faith remained alive because I believed that only Allah could rescue me from the darkness surrounding me.